Just leave the twins with Grandma. Those words weren't a request, they were a demand, dropped like a bombshell from my daughter-in-law's lips, her eyes barely meeting mine as if I were invisible. And the worst part? I was already packing my suitcase for a first-class flight to Dubai, a secret she never suspected. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Rose, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew what my life was supposed to look like. Every morning in my cramped Queens apartment began the same way, stirring lukewarm coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, the one my late husband Frank bought me from a street vendor 30 years ago. The smell of old books mixed with the city's exhaust fumes that somehow always found their way through my third-floor window. The twins' laughter, which once felt like music, had gradually transformed into background noise I could barely manage to endure. My bones ached from years of bending, lifting, sacrificing. I had been invisible for so long that sometimes I wondered if I was becoming transparent, like those faded photographs on my mantelpiece where the faces had started to blur with time. The day everything changed started just like any other. I had been excited, and I say excited with the kind of ridiculous enthusiasm you might expect from a teenager, not a woman my age. My bags were carefully packed, not the shabby canvas tote I used for grocery runs, but my good navy suitcase with the brass corners, the one Frank had bought me for our honeymoon to Florida that we never took because his mother got sick. My red leather passport holder was clicked shut with a satisfying snap, and inside, tucked like a secret treasure, was my first-class ticket to Dubai. Dreams I had postponed for decades were finally within reach. The brochure pictures of golden sunsets over glass towers, of markets filled with spices and silks, had been pinned to my refrigerator for months. But when my daughter-in-law whispered those words, "Just leave the twins with Grandma," the air in the room seemed to crumble around me like old plaster. She stood there in my living room, her perfectly manicured nails tap-tapping against her designer handbag, not even bothering to look at me directly. To her, I wasn't Rose, the woman who had raised 3 children of her own, who had worked 2 jobs to put my son through college, who had held Frank's hand as he took his last breath. I was just a babysitter. A convenient, aging relic who could be counted on to always say yes, always sacrifice, always disappear when needed. I looked at the twins, sweet Emma and little Jake, only 4 years old, their innocent faces glowing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through my lace curtains. They were building a tower with wooden blocks on my carpet, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the air above their heads. Behind them on the wall hung family photos going back 20 years, pictures of my son Michael as a gap-toothed boy holding his first baseball trophy, of Frank teaching him to ride a bike in Flushing Meadows Park, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings when our apartment felt full of love instead of obligation. The faint scent of lavender still lingered in the air from Frank's old cologne bottle, the one I kept on my dresser even though it had been empty for 3 years. That cologne used to be on a silk scarf he left behind, and on particularly lonely nights, I would press my face against it and remember when I wasn't just Grandma, when I was someone's wife, someone's everything. But that day, even nostalgia couldn't shield me from the sharp reality that hit like a slap across the face. I was trapped. Trapped by expectations, by guilt, by a family who saw me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be loved. Do you know that feeling? When you realize that the people you would die for wouldn't even live for you. Over the years, I had poured everything I had into my family like water into a bucket with holes in the bottom. When Frank fell ill with his heart condition, I sold my grandmother's sterling silver necklace, the one piece of jewelry I had sworn never to part with, to cover the medical bills that insurance wouldn't touch. My son Michael grew distant during those difficult months, and I caught him more than once whispering to his new wife about how I was taking sides with the doctors, as if wanting my husband to live was somehow a betrayal of their financial comfort. I had forgiven lost holidays when they decided to spend Christmas with her parents instead. I had smiled through forgotten birthdays where not even a phone call came. I had swallowed cruel words thrown during arguments like bitter pills, telling myself that family meant accepting the unacceptable because love was supposed to conquer all. "I'm doing this for the family," Michael would say whenever I questioned their decisions, his voice tight with an irritation that made my stomach clench. But his eyes would flicker away from mine, cold and tired, as if even looking at me was a burden he could barely manage. Those eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room now seemed to see right through me. My daughter-in-law Sarah had her own way of making me feel small. She would sigh heavily whenever I offered advice about the children, rolling her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. One evening, after yet another silent dinner at their house in Bayside where I felt like an unwelcome guest at my own family's table, she snapped at me, "You never understand, Mom. Things are different now." The word "Mom" came out of her mouth like a curse word, sharp and resentful. The phrase echoed in my head for days afterward, mixing with the cold air that seemed to suffocate our tiny apartment whenever they visited. Did they ever stop to think about my sacrifices? The nights I stayed up until 2 in the morning hand-sewing tiny buttons on the twins' clothes because store-bought outfits were too expensive. The times I canceled my own doctor's appointments because Sarah had a yoga class and couldn't pick up the children from daycare. It was as if they expected me to be forever available, always ready to drop everything at a moment's notice. Always Grandma, never Rose. Never a woman with dreams of her own, never someone who might want to see the world before arthritis made climbing stairs impossible, never someone who deserved to be asked instead of commanded. The subtle neglect haunted me every single day like a persistent ache in my chest. My 70th birthday came and went without so much as a card. When I caught a harsh flu last winter that kept me bedridden for a week, no one called to check if I needed groceries or medicine. I had to drag myself to the corner pharmacy, coughing and shivering, because the alternative was starving in my own apartment. The twins would visit and bounce around happily, their energy filling my small rooms with chaos, but they were blissfully unaware of the loneliness that seeped into my tired bones like cold seeping into an old house. They loved Grandma Rose when she had cookies and games and infinite patience. But when I was sick, when I was sad, when I needed something in return, I became invisible again. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A week before my planned trip to Dubai, I was looking for my insurance papers behind the bookshelf when my fingers found something unexpected, a bank statement that had fallen and been forgotten. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Someone had been withdrawing money from my retirement savings account. Large amounts. Regularly. For months. The account I had built penny by penny over 40 years of work, the nest egg that was supposed to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to anyone in my old age, had been systematically drained. $17,000. Gone. Vanished like morning mist, taking with it my security and my peace of mind. My son had power of attorney. He was the only one who could access that account. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen with all the lights off, the city noise from Queens Boulevard filtering through my thin walls. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I reached for my favorite teacup, the delicate porcelain one with tiny roses painted around the rim, a gift from my mother on my wedding day. It slipped from my fingers like hope itself, shattering against the linoleum floor with a sound that seemed to echo in my soul. Silent tears carved warm trails down my cheeks as I knelt among the broken pieces, each fragment reflecting the kitchen light like tiny mirrors showing me different angles of my pain. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. What if I said no? What if I stopped giving money, stopped babysitting, stopped being the family doormat? But the fear crept in immediately, cold and suffocating. Living alone was terrifying at my age. What if something happened to me and no one found me for days? What if I fell in the shower and couldn't get up? I had been the glue holding their chaotic lives together for so long that I had forgotten how to exist without that purpose, even if that purpose was slowly killing me. Was I ready to let go? Was I strong enough to choose dignity over fear? I spent that entire night staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, seeing a face I barely recognized. The wrinkles had deepened from years of worry, not wisdom. My eyes had dulled from disappointment, not age. My mouth had learned to stay shut rather than express my needs. I looked like a woman who had spent decades apologizing for taking up space in her own life. With shaking hands, I began taking down the family photos from their places of honor on my walls. The wedding picture where Michael looked so young and hopeful. The Christmas morning when the twins were babies and everyone seemed genuinely happy. The vacation photo from Atlantic City where we all wore matching t-shirts and laughed at Frank's terrible jokes. I packed them away in a cardboard box, hiding them in my bedroom closet like painful evidence of memories I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Each photograph felt heavy with broken promises and one-sided love. When I finally confronted Michael about the missing money, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face clouded with immediate denial, but his eyes darted away from mine like a guilty child caught stealing cookies. "Mom, you're misunderstanding something," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "We never took your money. Maybe you're confused about something." Confused. As if being 72 automatically meant I couldn't read bank statements or remember my own finances. As if my concerns were the ramblings of a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own thoughts. Sarah was even worse. She unleashed her own brand of subtle manipulation with surgical precision. "You're just tired, Rose," she said with fake concern dripping from her voice like honey from a cracked jar. "Maybe you're slipping a little. It happens at your age. Maybe you should let us handle your money from now on." Slipping. The word hit me like a physical blow. They wanted me to believe that I was losing my mind, that my legitimate anger was actually dementia, that my desire for respect was just confusion. Even the twins seemed to sense the tension crackling between the adults, and they began avoiding my gaze during their visits. Emma, who used to run to me with arms wide open, now hung back near her mother's legs. Little Jake stopped asking me to read him stories. The unconditional love of children, it turns out, can be conditional after all when the adults in their lives poison the well. The emotional blackmail was relentless and brutal. If you walk away from us, you lose the twins forever, Michael warned me during one particularly vicious argument. Is that what you want? To die alone with no family? The weight of that threat pressed down on my chest, making every breath heavier than the last. They knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make me doubt myself. They had studied my fears like a map and learned to navigate them with cruel efficiency. But then something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything. Betty Martinez, my neighbor from apartment 3B, knocked on my door one afternoon with a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies and the kind of warm smile that reaches all the way to the eyes. Betty was a sprightly woman in her 70s with silver hair she wore in a neat bob and a wardrobe of colorful blouses that made her look like a garden in spring. "You look like you could use some sweetness in your day," she said simply, and somehow that small act of kindness broke something open inside me. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had cried over bank statements and broken teacups, and I found myself telling her everything. About the money, about the neglect, about feeling invisible in my own family. Betty listened without judgment, nodding at all the right moments, her weathered hands reaching across to squeeze mine when the words became too difficult. "You deserve better, Rose," she said when I finished my story. "You deserve so much better." For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a grandmother or a caregiver or a source of money, but as Rose. As a woman with worth and dignity and the right to be treated with love instead of exploitation. Have you ever had someone look at you and see your true value when you had forgotten it yourself? That conversation with Betty planted a seed that grew into something I never expected: courage. I started small, testing my newfound strength like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. When Michael called asking for another loan to cover their vacation expenses, I said no. Just like that. No elaborate explanation, no apology, no guilt. Just no. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. He had clearly been expecting the usual immediate yes, followed by my offer to transfer money that same day. "What do you mean, no?" he asked, his voice sharp with surprise and anger. "I mean no, Michael. I will not be giving you any more money." Instead of answering his increasingly desperate follow-up calls, I made an appointment with a financial advisor Betty had recommended. Her name was Maria Santos, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in helping seniors protect their assets from family financial abuse, apparently a more common problem than I had ever imagined. "Mrs. Peterson," Maria said as she reviewed my bank statements, "what happened to you is called elder financial abuse, and it's a crime. Your son had no right to withdraw that money without your explicit consent." A crime. My own son had committed a crime against me, his mother. The woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a good life. The realization was both devastating and strangely liberating. With Maria's help, I changed all my passwords, removed Michael's power of attorney, and opened a new account at a different bank. I also did something that felt impossibly bold. I kept my travel plans secret and boarded that first-class flight to Dubai. The Emirates airplane was like stepping into another world. The seats were wider than my entire kitchen, covered in buttery leather that smelled expensive and felt like a hug. The flight attendants called me "ma'am" with genuine respect, not the patronizing patience I had grown accustomed to. When they offered me champagne before takeoff, I accepted it with a trembling hand and toasted my own courage. As New York disappeared below me through the small airplane window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Pure, intoxicating freedom from expectations and guilt and the crushing weight of being perpetually disappointed by the people I loved most. That first night in Dubai, lying in a hotel bed with Egyptian cotton sheets that felt like clouds against my skin, I slept. I truly slept, without dreams of sick husbands or crying grandchildren or bank statements with red numbers. I slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had finally stopped carrying the world on her shoulders. The city was everything the brochures had promised and more. Golden sunsets painted the glass towers in shades of fire, and the markets were alive with colors and scents that made my senses sing. I bought a silk scarf in brilliant turquoise, not because it was practical or on sale, but because it was beautiful and I wanted it. When was the last time I had bought something simply because it brought me joy? I took photographs of everything. The fountain shows at the mall, the view from the top of the Burj Khalifa, the sunrise over the desert during a camel ride that made my back ache and my heart sore. For the first time in decades, I was living my own life instead of serving as a supporting character in everyone else's story. But of course, paradise couldn't last forever. Reality has a way of finding you, even in first-class airplane seats and five-star hotel rooms. A month after I returned to Queens, tanned and rested and feeling more like myself than I had in years, Michael arranged a video call. The familiar guilt tried to creep back in as I saw the twins waving sheepishly at the camera, their sweet faces reminding me of all the bedtime stories I hadn't been there to read and all the scraped knees I hadn't been there to kiss. The living room behind them looked messier than usual, and I could see Sarah in the background loading the dishwasher with more aggressive clattering than seemed necessary. Michael's face appeared tired and strained, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 38 years. "Mom," he began, and I could hear the carefully rehearsed speech in his tone, "we miss you. The kids ask about you every day. When are you coming back to help us out?" Help them out. Not visit. Not spend time together. Help them out, as if I were a service they had temporarily lost access to. I reached behind me and picked up a large, faded photograph that I had been keeping on my coffee table, a picture of all of us from 3 Christmases ago, back when I still believed that love was supposed to hurt this much. Michael and Sarah were smiling, the twins were in matching red pajamas, and I was in the background, as always, holding a tray of cookies I had spent all morning making. Slowly, deliberately, I tore the photograph in half. The sound was sharp and final, crackling through the video call microphone like a gunshot. "I will no longer buy love," I said, my voice steady and clear in a way that surprised even me. "Respect me or lose me." Michael's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, scared and seeking comfort. But then his expression hardened again, and the manipulative adult he had become reasserted itself. "You're being dramatic, Mom. We're family. Family helps each other. Family respects each other," I replied. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't take advantage of each other's love." Sarah appeared on screen then, her face flushed with anger. "We gave you grandchildren," she hissed. "We let you be part of their lives. Isn't that enough? Let me." As if being part of my own grandchildren's lives was a privilege they had graciously granted rather than a relationship that belonged to me by right. I ended the video call without another word. My hands were shaking, but it was a different kind of trembling than I had experienced before. This wasn't fear or weakness. This was the earthquake of seismic change, the trembling that comes when you finally find the strength to move mountains. But if I thought that confrontation would be the end of it, I was naive. The next surprise came in the form of social media, a realm I had only recently entered thanks to Betty's patient teaching. A Facebook post appeared on Sarah's page with a photograph of the twins looking sad and a caption that made my breath catch in my throat. "Some grandparents choose their own comfort over their family's needs. Pray for children who have been abandoned by the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally." The post had dozens of likes and comments from friends and family members I barely knew, people offering sympathy to my son and daughter-in-law for having such a selfish mother and mother-in-law. The narrative had been completely twisted. I was no longer the victim of financial abuse and emotional neglect. I was the villain who had abandoned innocent children for a luxury vacation. My first instinct was to fight back, to post my own response explaining the truth, to defend myself against these lies. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I composed dozens of different replies in my mind, each one more desperate than the last. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling under this public humiliation, I felt a quiet strength rising up from somewhere deep inside me. A steady flame that refused to be extinguished by their desperate attempts to shame me back into submission. I closed the laptop without typing a single word in response. This was my final test, the ultimate proof that my transformation was real and irreversible. They could spread lies about me to anyone who would listen, but they couldn't force me to defend myself against accusations that anyone who truly knew me would recognize as false. The people who mattered, like Betty, saw right through Sarah's manipulation. "Anyone who really knows you understands what kind of person you are," she told me over coffee the next morning. "Let them make noise. You don't need to join the circus." That's when I knew I was truly free. Not because the pain had disappeared, it still hurt to be portrayed as a villain by my own family, but because their opinion of me no longer controlled my actions. I had found something more valuable than their approval, my own self-respect. 6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment in Miami Beach, a cozy one-bedroom place with a view of the ocean instead of the Queens traffic. The rent was actually cheaper than what I had been paying in New York, and the warm weather was kinder to my aging joints than the harsh northeastern winters had been. I had taken up photography, not as a hobby but as a passion that consumed my days with purpose and joy. My camera captured sunrise over the Atlantic, elderly couples dancing at the community center, children building sandcastles that reminded me of the twins without breaking my heart. Betty had moved to Miami too, finding her own apartment just 3 blocks away. We had coffee every morning at a little cafe near the beach, and she had introduced me to a group of women our age who met weekly for book club and monthly for trips to art museums and botanical gardens. For the first time in my adult life, I had friendships that weren't based on what I could provide for other people. These women liked me for who I was, not what I could do for them. They called to check on me when I was sick, remembered my birthday with cards and flowers, and included me in their conversations as an equal rather than an afterthought. I sent postcards to old friends from high school whom I had reconnected with through social media. Women I hadn't spoken to in 20 years who remembered me as adventurous and funny, who knew nothing about the small, sad person I had become in my own family's eyes. The postcards showed palm trees and Art Deco buildings and beaches that stretched to the horizon. On the back, I wrote simple messages: learning to salsa dance at 72. Never too late for new dreams. Wish you were here. One evening, as I sat with a glass of wine watching the sun paint the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold, my phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing. No guilt, no anger, no desperate hope that this would be the call where he apologized and begged me to come home. Just nothing. I let it go to voicemail. Later, when I was ready, I listened to his message. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, less certain of his own righteousness. "Mom," he said, with the kind of pause that suggested he had rehearsed this speech multiple times. "Sarah and I have been talking. We think maybe we haven't been fair to you. The kids miss you. I miss you. Can we talk?" I saved the message but didn't return the call. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't ready. I needed to be sure that any relationship we rebuilt would be based on mutual respect rather than my desperate need to be needed. I had learned the hard way that love without respect is just another form of abuse. 3 months later, Michael called again. This time, his voice broke as he spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know we treated you terribly. I know I stole from you, and I know Sarah was cruel to you, and I know we took advantage of your love. I've been going to therapy, and I'm starting to understand how much we hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry." This message, I did return. Not because I was ready to let them back into my life completely, but because healing has to start somewhere, and sometimes it starts with someone having the courage to tell the truth. We talked for 2 hours. He cried. I cried. He told me about the financial stress that had driven him to make terrible choices, about how Sarah's own difficult relationship with her mother had poisoned her attitude toward me, about how guilty he felt every day for destroying the relationship with the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. I told him about the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about the night I broke my mother's teacup and realized I was breaking along with it. I told him about Betty and photography and salsa dancing and the peace I had found in putting myself first for the first time in 7 decades. Did I forgive him? That's complicated. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a process you work through. But I did something more important than forgive him. I set boundaries. Clear, non-negotiable boundaries. If he wanted a relationship with me, it would be based on respect. No more financial demands. No more expecting me to drop everything to provide free childcare. No more dismissing my needs as less important than theirs. And absolutely no more stealing from my accounts or manipulating my emotions to get what they wanted. To his credit, he agreed to every condition. He also insisted on paying back every penny he had taken, though I told him to put that money into college funds for the twins instead. Sarah took longer to come around. Pride is a difficult thing to swallow, and admitting that you've been cruel to a 72-year-old woman doesn't come easily to someone who sees herself as a victim. But eventually, she called too. Her apology was shorter and less detailed than Michael's, but it felt genuine. "I'm sorry, Rose," she said simply. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Sometimes the longest journeys begin with the shortest sentences. The twins are 8 now, and they visit me in Miami twice a year. Not because I'm providing free babysitting or because their parents need something from me, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company. I teach Emma to use my camera, and she takes pictures of seashells and sandcastles with the same concentration she once used to build block towers in my Queens apartment. Jake is learning to cook, and we make cookies together in my little kitchen, measuring flour and cracking eggs while he tells me about school and soccer and the books he's reading. These visits feel different from the old days. Lighter somehow. Built on love instead of obligation. Michael and Sarah have learned to ask instead of demand. "Would you be interested in spending Christmas with us this year?" instead of, "We'll pick you up on Christmas Eve." The difference might seem small, but it's everything. It's the difference between being a person with choices and being a possession to be moved around at other people's convenience. Do I still feel hurt sometimes? Of course. There are scars that will never fully heal, trust that will never be completely restored. But I've learned something important about love: it's not supposed to diminish you. Real love doesn't require you to disappear so that other people can shine brighter. Real love sees you and values you and makes space for your dreams alongside their own. I'm 73 now, and I'm finally living the life I want instead of the life other people expect from me. I've traveled to Morocco and Italy and Iceland. I've published a small book of photography that sells at the local art fairs. I've learned to tango and taken cooking classes and joined a book club where we argue passionately about character motivation and plot development. I wake up every morning in my sunny apartment and make coffee in a new ceramic mug, this one decorated with tropical flowers that match my current life instead of faded memories of my old one. The ocean breeze carries the scent of salt and possibility through my windows, and I plan my day around my own desires instead of other people's emergencies. Betty and I are planning a trip to Japan next spring. At 73 and 76, we figure we're old enough to do whatever we want and young enough to still enjoy it. We're going to see cherry blossoms and ancient temples and eat sushi for breakfast if that's what strikes our fancy. Last week, I got a text from Emma with a picture she drew of the two of us on the beach in Miami. In the drawing, we're both smiling, and the sun is shining, and there are dolphins jumping in the background because that's how she sees our visits, as adventures full of joy and possibility. That drawing is framed on my refrigerator now, next to a postcard from Betty's nephew in California and a grocery list written in my own handwriting. Simple things, but they represent a life that belongs to me. A life where I matter not because of what I can provide, but because of who I am. Those years of suffering weren't lost years, they were the price I paid to learn my own worth. Every humiliation, every moment of feeling invisible, every tear I cried over broken teacups and empty bank accounts led me to this moment where I finally understand that I deserve to be loved properly or not at all. I learned that respect is never owed to you just because you share DNA with someone. Respect is earned and maintained through actions, not words. I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't know how to love you well. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to draw new boundaries, chase new dreams, or demand better treatment from the people in your life. Age doesn't disqualify you from dignity. Being someone's mother or grandmother doesn't mean you stop being yourself. The sunset outside my window is painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, and I'm sitting here with my evening glass of wine, something I never allowed myself in the old days because it seemed too indulgent, too selfish. Now I understand that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. If my story sounds familiar to you, if you recognize yourself in my years of invisible suffering or in my journey towards self-respect, I want you to know something: you matter. Your happiness matters. Your peace of mind matters. Your dreams matter, even if you're 60 or 70 or 80 years old. You don't have to accept cruelty disguised as love. You don't have to sacrifice your dignity on the altar of family harmony. You don't have to disappear so that other people can feel more comfortable. You have the right to be seen, valued, and treated with respect by the people who claim to love you. Have you ever lived something like this, or known someone who has experienced this kind of family dynamic where love feels more like obligation and respect seems to flow in only one direction? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps us realize we're not alone in our struggles, and it gives others the courage to make their own difficult but necessary changes. If my story has touched you, even a little bit, if it's made you think about your own relationships or given you hope that change is possible at any age, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It truly helps me reach other people who might need to hear these words, who might be sitting in their own cramped apartments wondering if this is all their life is supposed to be. Your support helps me keep opening my heart, keep sharing these difficult but important stories, and keep reminding people that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening, for witnessing my journey from invisible grandmother to visible woman, and for being part of this community where we can be honest about the complicated, messy, beautiful work of learning to love ourselves enough to demand better. The sun has set now, and the stars are beginning to appear over the Miami skyline. Tomorrow I'll wake up to another day of freedom, another day of choices made for my own happiness, another day of living as Rose instead of just existing as Grandma. And that, my friends, makes every moment of that painful journey worth it. But life has a way of continuing to teach us lessons, even when we think we've learned all there is to know. Just last month, I experienced something that reminded me how complex human relationships really are, and how healing isn't always a straight line from pain to peace. I was at the farmer's market, a Saturday morning ritual I've grown to love here in Miami. The air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of fresh mangoes and key lime pies from local vendors. I was examining a display of heirloom tomatoes, their red and yellow skins gleaming in the morning sun, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Rose? Rose Peterson? I turned around and found myself face to face with my sister Linda, whom I hadn't seen in over 3 years. Linda lived in Orlando, and we had grown apart after Frank's death, not from any dramatic fight, but from the gradual drift that sometimes happens when life becomes overwhelming and relationships require more energy than you feel you have to give. She looked older, grayer, with the kind of tired lines around her eyes that spoke of recent struggles. Her clothes were neat but worn, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone trying to appear stronger than they felt. "Linda," I said, surprised by how genuinely happy I was to see her. "What are you doing in Miami?" "I'm living here now," she said, and there was something in her voice that made me set down the tomato I had been holding. I moved down here 2 months ago. I've been going through some things. We found a small cafe with outdoor seating beneath a canopy of bougainvillea, and over cups of strong Cuban coffee, Linda told me her story. Her husband of 35 years had left her for a woman 20 years younger. Her adult children, busy with their own lives and apparently tired of listening to their mother's pain, had stopped returning her calls with any regularity. She had sold the house in Orlando and moved to Miami because, she said with a bitter laugh, she wanted to start over somewhere nobody knew her as the woman who got dumped. I heard about what happened with Michael, she said quietly, stirring sugar into her coffee with more concentration than the task required. I heard about how they treated you, and about how you fought back. I admired it, Rose. I was proud of you for standing up for yourself. You heard about it? I asked, curious about how family news travels through networks you thought had forgotten you existed. Cousin Margaret told me. She said Michael was telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown and abandoned the family for a midlife crisis vacation. Linda's voice carried a sharp edge of anger. But Margaret also said she saw your Facebook pictures from Dubai, and you looked happier than anyone had seen you in years. She said it was obvious to anyone with eyes that you weren't having a breakdown, you were having a breakthrough. I hadn't realized that my transformation had been noticed by the extended family, or that my story had been twisted and retold through the telephone game of family gossip. It was both disturbing and oddly validating to learn that some people had seen through Michael and Sarah's version of events. The truth is, Linda continued, seeing you have the courage to choose yourself made me realize how much I had been accepting mistreatment too. Not from my children, but from Richard. He had been telling me for years that I was too needy, too emotional, too much. When he left, my first reaction was to beg him to come back, to promise I would change, to take all the blame for our marriage failing. She paused to take a sip of her coffee, and I could see her gathering strength to continue. But then I remembered you. I remembered thinking about how you had packed your bags and flown to Dubai despite everyone telling you that you were being selfish. I thought about how you chose your own dignity over everyone else's comfort. And I realized that maybe I didn't want to beg someone to love me who had spent decades making me feel like loving me was a burden. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women in their 70s who had finally learned that teaching people how to treat you starts with treating yourself with respect. Are you okay? I asked her. I mean, financially, emotionally? I'm getting there, she said. The divorce settlement was fair, and I found a little apartment not too far from here. I started seeing a therapist, can you imagine, at my age, and she's helping me figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else wants me to be. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I think that's the most important work any of us can do, at any age. I was wondering, Linda said hesitantly, if maybe we could be sisters again. Real sisters. I know we drifted apart, and I know I wasn't there for you when Frank died, and I'm sorry about that. I was so wrapped up in my own misery that I forgot other people were hurting too. The apology was simple and honest, without the manipulation or excuses I had grown accustomed to from other family members. Linda wasn't asking me to forget what had happened or pretend it didn't matter. She was acknowledging her absence and asking for a chance to do better. I'd like that, I told her, and I meant it. Over the following weeks, Linda and I began rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. We started with coffee dates twice a week, then progressed to longer visits where we shared the stories we had been carrying alone. She told me about the night Richard left, how he packed his clothes while she was at her book club meeting, leaving only a note on the kitchen table that said he needed space to find himself. I told her about the morning I woke up in Dubai and realized I had spent the entire night without dreaming about Frank's medical bills or the twins' schedules or Michael's disappointment. How foreign it felt to wake up with my first thought being about my own desires for the day rather than everyone else's needs. Linda had her own version of my Betty Martinez, a neighbor named Carol who had invited her to join a grief support group for women dealing with major life transitions. I was resistant at first, Linda admitted. I kept thinking I was too old to start over, too set in my ways to learn new patterns. But Carol told me something that stuck. You're not too old to heal. You're just old enough to know better. The grief support group, it turned out, was full of women who had stories similar to ours. Women who had spent decades pouring themselves into relationships that left them empty. Women who had been told they were too sensitive, too demanding, too much. Women who were learning, sometimes for the first time, to value their own opinions and trust their own instincts. There's something powerful about sitting in a circle with other women and realizing you're not crazy, Linda told me one afternoon as we walked along Miami Beach, our feet leaving temporary impressions in the sand. For so long, I thought the problem was me. Richard convinced me that if I could just be less needy, less emotional, less complicated, then he would be able to love me the way I wanted to be loved. I nodded, understanding completely. Michael used to tell me that if I could just be more understanding, more flexible, more supportive, then maybe he could find time for me in his busy life. As if love was something you earned through perfect behavior rather than something you deserved simply for being human. The therapist asked me what I would tell my younger self if I could go back in time, Linda continued. And I realized I would tell her that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself. Real love makes room for all of you, your needs, your emotions, your dreams, your flaws. Everything. We stopped walking and stood facing the ocean, letting the warm water lap at our ankles. The horizon stretched endlessly before us, and I couldn't help but think about how different this moment felt from those lonely evenings in my Queens apartment when the world seemed to end at my living room walls. Do you think we would have learned these lessons if we were younger? I asked Linda. She considered the question seriously. I don't know. Maybe we needed to experience all that loss and disappointment to appreciate what we have now. Maybe wisdom really does come from surviving what you thought would destroy you. That evening, I called Betty to tell her about my reconnection with Linda. Betty had become more than a neighbor or even a friend. She was like the sister I had always wished I could have, the one who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. You know what I love about this? Betty said after I finished describing my afternoon with Linda. You're not just rebuilding your relationship with her. You're modeling what healthy relationships look like. You're showing her that it's possible to love someone without losing yourself. It was true. The relationship Linda and I were creating was different from the one we had before. We were more honest about our needs, more direct about our boundaries, and more generous with our support. We had learned to ask for what we needed instead of hoping the people who loved us would somehow intuit it. When Linda mentioned that she was nervous about upcoming medical appointments because she hated going to doctors alone, I offered to drive her without being asked. When I told her I was feeling anxious about a photography exhibition where I was displaying some of my work, she offered to come with me for moral support. These weren't the grand gestures of martyrdom I had grown accustomed to making in my relationships with Michael and Sarah. They were the small, reciprocal acts of care that build trust over time. We were learning to give freely without keeping score, and to receive gracefully without feeling guilty. The photography exhibition was actually a bigger success than I had anticipated. I had submitted 6 photographs to a local art show featuring senior artists, not really expecting anything to come of it. But 3 of my pieces sold, and several people asked for my contact information because they were interested in commissioning work. Standing there in the gallery, watching strangers examine my photographs with genuine interest and appreciation, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with other people's approval. I had created something beautiful, something worthy of attention, something that reflected my unique way of seeing the world. Linda was there, of course, beaming with pride as if my success was her own. But so were Betty and several of the women from our book club, and even Maria Santos, the financial advisor who had helped me protect my assets from Michael's theft. Looking around at this group of women who had supported my journey toward self-respect, I realized I had accidentally created the family I had always wanted. Not a family bound by blood or obligation, but a family bound by choice and mutual respect. A family where everyone's dreams mattered, where support flowed freely in all directions, where love was expressed through presence rather than sacrifice. After the exhibition, we went to dinner at a restaurant overlooking the bay, and as I listened to the laughter and conversation flowing around our table, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago. That woman would never have believed she deserved this kind of joy, this kind of community, this kind of recognition for her talents. That woman would have found a way to diminish her own accomplishment, to redirect attention away from herself, to make herself smaller so that other people could feel more comfortable. She would have probably given away the money from selling her photographs to Michael and Sarah, telling herself that their needs were more important than her dreams. But I am not that woman anymore. I kept the money from my art sales and used it to book a photography workshop in Tuscany, another first-class flight, another adventure planned for my own enjoyment, another investment in the person I am becoming rather than the person I used to be. The night before I left for Italy, Michael called. It had been several months since our last conversation, and I was surprised by how calm I felt when I saw his name on my phone screen. No racing heart, no immediate guilt, no desperate hope that this would be the call where everything magically returned to the way it used to be. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded different again. Older, maybe. More thoughtful. "I heard about your art show from Cousin Margaret. She said you sold some photographs and that you looked really happy." "I am happy," I said simply. "I'm living my own life for the first time in years." "I'm glad," he said, and I was surprised to realize he sounded like he meant it. "I wanted to call because Sarah and I have been talking, and we think we understand better now why you had to leave." I waited for the but, for the qualifier that would minimize my experience or center his feelings. It didn't come. "We were selfish," he continued. "We took advantage of your love, and we convinced ourselves it was okay because you're our family and family is supposed to help each other. But we never helped you. We just took and took until there was nothing left to take. It was the most honest assessment of our relationship that I had ever heard from him. The twins ask about you sometimes, he said. Emma found some old photos of you and her baking cookies together, and she wanted to know when Grandma Rose was coming back. I didn't know what to tell her. The mention of the twins still tugged at my heart, but it was a gentler pull now. Love without desperation. Affection without the need to sacrifice my own well-being. I'm going to Italy next week, I told him. When I get back, maybe we can arrange a video call so I can see them. But Michael, I need you to understand something. I love those children, but I won't go back to being the grandmother who exists only to make everyone else's life easier. I know, he said quickly. I understand. We don't want that either. I want you to be happy, Mom. I want you to have your own life. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out that you deserved that. We talked for another 20 minutes, and for the first time in years, it felt like a conversation between equals rather than a negotiation between a supplicant and someone holding all the power. He told me about the counseling he and Sarah were attending, about the financial planning they were doing to become less dependent on external support, about the parenting classes they had enrolled in to learn how to raise children without burning out the grandparents. When we hung up, I felt cautiously hopeful. Not for a complete restoration of our old relationship, that ship had sailed, and I wasn't sure I would want it back even if it were possible, but for the possibility of building something new and healthier. The trip to Italy was everything I had dreamed it would be. The Tuscan countryside rolled out before me in waves of golden hills and ancient olive groves, and the light at sunset was unlike anything I had ever tried to capture with my camera. I learned about composition and exposure from a photographer who had been featured in National Geographic, and I spent my evenings in the hotel courtyard reviewing the day's work with other students who ranged in age from 30 to 85. One evening, over glasses of local wine and plates of fresh pasta, I found myself telling my photography classmates about my journey from invisible grandmother to visible woman. They listened with the kind of attention that told me they recognized pieces of their own stories in mine. I think every woman has a moment, said Patricia, a divorced teacher from Canada, where she realizes she can keep shrinking to fit into other people's expectations, or she can expand to fill the space she actually deserves. The hardest part, added Margot, a widow from Germany, is trusting that you deserve to take up space. We're taught from such a young age that good women are selfless women, that our worth is measured by how much we sacrifice for others. But sacrifice without choice isn't virtue, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. It's just slow self-destruction disguised as love. These conversations, with women from different countries and cultures who had faced similar challenges, reinforced something I had learned over the past few years: the expectation that women, especially older women, should disappear gracefully into the background is not unique to my family or my culture. It's a pattern that repeats across generations and continents, and breaking free from it requires both individual courage and collective support. When I returned from Italy, my apartment felt different. Not physically, everything was exactly where I had left it, but energetically. It felt like a home that belonged to a woman who knew her own worth, who had friends who supported her dreams, who had family members learning to treat her with respect. I developed the photographs from Italy, and several of them exceeded even my own expectations. There was one in particular, a sunrise over a vineyard with morning mist clinging to the vines, that captured something I had never quite achieved before. Not just the beauty of the scene, but the emotion of the moment. The joy of being exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I loved to do, without apology or explanation. I decided to enter that photograph in a regional photography contest, not because I expected to win, but because I had learned that taking myself seriously as an artist was part of taking myself seriously as a person. 6 weeks later, I received an email that made me read the same paragraph 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. My photograph had won first place in the landscape category, and the prize included both a cash award and an invitation to display my work in a group exhibition at a prestigious gallery in downtown Miami. I called Linda first, then Betty, then the women from my book club. Each conversation was filled with the kind of genuine excitement that comes from people who truly understand what an accomplishment means to you. No one diminished my success by suggesting it was lucky or accidental. No one immediately asked what I was going to do with the prize money. They celebrated my talent and my courage to share it with the world. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of champagne, watching the lights of Miami Beach twinkle like stars that had fallen to earth. My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from friends, and I realized that this sense of being supported and valued and celebrated, was what I had been seeking all along. Not the desperate need to be needed, but the peaceful joy of being genuinely appreciated. Not the exhausting cycle of giving until it hurt, but the sustainable rhythm of mutual care and respect. Not the fear of being alone, but the confidence that comes from knowing you can be happy with your own company while still being open to meaningful connections with others. The next morning brought another surprise. An email from Emma, now 9 years old and apparently allowed to use her mother's computer under supervision. The subject line read, "Congratulations Grandma Rose," and the message was short but perfect. "Daddy told me about your picture winning the contest. I'm proud of you. I can't wait to see it when we video chat next week. I've been taking pictures with the camera you got me for my birthday. Maybe someday I can be a photographer like you. I love you." I cried then, but they were different tears than the ones I had shed in my Queens apartment. These were tears of joy, of connection maintained despite distance, of love that had survived transformation and grown stronger for it. Emma and I did video chat the following week, and she enthusiastically showed me dozens of photographs she had taken around their house and neighborhood. Some were blurry, some were crooked, but all of them were filled with the kind of curious perspective that makes children natural photographers. "I want to come visit you in Miami," she announced during our call, with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who hasn't yet learned that wanting something and getting it are two different things. "I'd love that," I told her, and I meant it. "But it would have to be planned properly, with your parents' permission and all the arrangements made ahead of time." "I know," she said solemnly. "Daddy said we have to respect your life now, and that means asking instead of just expecting." The fact that Michael was teaching his daughter about respect and boundaries gave me more hope for their future than any of his apologies had. Children learn more from what they see than what they're told, and if Emma was learning to ask for what she wanted rather than demand it, she was learning lessons that would serve her well throughout her life. As our call ended, I realized something that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. I was genuinely happy with the way my family relationships were evolving. Not because they had returned to some idealized version of closeness, but because they were based on honesty and mutual respect for the first time in years. I had learned to love my son and grandchildren without losing myself in that love. They were learning to appreciate me without taking me for granted. We were all growing into versions of ourselves that were more authentic and less performing roles we thought we were supposed to play. The gallery exhibition was scheduled for the following month, and I found myself both excited and nervous as the date approached. This would be the largest showing of my work to date, and several local art critics were expected to attend. Betty helped me choose which photographs to display, and Linda offered to handle the practical details of matting and framing. It struck me how natural it felt to accept help from people who offered it freely, without strings attached or expectations of reciprocal favors. The night of the exhibition opening, I stood in front of my photographs surrounded by people who had come specifically to celebrate my work, and I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with internal alignment. I had become the person I was meant to be all along. Someone who created beauty, who valued herself, who maintained loving relationships without sacrificing her own well-being, who took up space in the world without apology. Looking around the gallery at my photographs, scenes of Dubai markets and Miami beaches, portraits of newfound friends and landscapes that had called to my artistic eye, I realized they told the story of my transformation better than words ever could. They were proof that it's never too late to discover who you truly are when you stop trying to be who everyone else needs you to be. The woman who had once cried over broken teacups and empty bank accounts was still part of me, but she was no longer defining me. She had been the cocoon, and I had been the butterfly waiting to emerge. As the evening wound down and I said goodbye to the friends and acquaintances who had come to support me, I knew that tomorrow would bring another day of living as Rose, not Grandma Rose or Mrs. Peterson or anyone's caretaker, but simply Rose. A woman with her own dreams, her own relationships, her own beautiful, complicated, thoroughly authentic life. And that, more than any photograph or prize or recognition, was the greatest work of art I had ever created.